There exists an idiom in design philosophy that most good designers will repeat ad nauseum, and that is to keep it simple, stupid. Or KISS. It's not a phrase that's meant to be taken literally, as there are many real-world machines and structures that are enormous in scope and work effectively, but it's more to point out the empirical reality that most effective designs tend not to overcomplicate things more than they have to. But I take it a step further, and that is by also adding that pursuing complexity also pursues uselessness. That is why I believe that the TF2 matchmaking system does not work nor will ever work, because it's solving a problem that does not need to be solved nor can be solved. In fact, the real-world problem already has its good enough solution in TF2, that being Team Scramble, and I'm going to prove it mathematically and logically. So what is the proof? Well, it all starts with...
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Or in much simpler terms, for this oversimplified proof, we need to cover some important ideas and how they apply to both SBMM and Team Scramble, those being heuristics, the law of large numbers, and entropy. I'll only talk about how SBMM is related to these topics first to keep the flow cleaner, but we'll wrap it up all together afterwards. First, heuristics is the practice of simplifying certain procedures based on information we already know in order to do things faster even though we might not make the best decision, kind of like a rule of thumb. An everyday example is having a rule not to plan a meeting immediately after another one, because we know that most meetings don't end when they should and it just needlessly induces stress. Could we? Sure, but the effort and energy to keep a schedule when we are aware meetings don't always end on time is naive. Is it the best outcome? No, but it is good enough. TF2's matchmaking applies heuristics quite rationally on paper. TF2 uses the Glicko score algorithm to handle its skill measuring for the use of organizing balanced matches. Glicko calculates a score to represent a skill level by keeping track of one's win rate and who they went up against and adjusting the score based on completed matches with a confidence measure as a weight to those adjustments. This is a heavily simplified explanation of the Glicko rating system, but as you're going to see, you don't need to know the intricacies. So effectively, what is happening is, instead of keeping track of the nuances of a game's mechanic or circumstances, the system effectively boils down skill level to a little more involved win-loss tracker. I think you already know the problem here, because you, dear watcher, are an intelligent, handsome, and beautiful person. Is that a new haircut? You are just glowing today. But we will come back to this later. The math, I mean. Next up, we have the law of large numbers, which is a statistical law that's main idea is that if you roll a random number enough times, with each roll being independent from one another, then the average of the results will slowly but surely get closer to the true average of the roll. So for example, a die has 6 sides, 1 through 6, so the average number of those 6 numbers is 3.5. If you roll it thrice, the average of those 3 rolls will likely not equal 3.5, but if you roll a die 1,000 times, with each concurrent roll, the average of the result will get closer and closer to 3.5, the true average. This one isn't immediately apparent with SBMM, but I will elaborate later. Finally, entropy is the measure of randomness in a system. If a system has concentrated high energy, it is low entropy. If a system has spread out low energy, it has high entropy. There's also the implicit rule that something from low entropy will move to high entropy over time, but not the other way around. An example of this would be an ice cube melting away into a puddle. An ice cube is dense with mass and has potential force. Compare that to a puddle that is spilled and spread out, and you can't really do much with it unless you collect it back into something dense. In a game like TF2, the allegorical entropy in a system is how similar each player is to one another, and the energy is the playtime and enjoyment that is generated by playing the game. Naturally, every player is vastly different in attitude, goals, and mindset when playing a game like TF2, especially with all its variables. There is a chaos to how spread out every player is from one another in their way of playing TF2. If every player could, they would play the game their own way, naturally spreading out into individual servers customized for their specific enjoyment. Obviously, this wouldn't be sustainable for the enjoyment of a game because each server would have unplayably low player counts. That might still be a little complicated, so let's take this real-world example I experienced. One late night in TF2, there were effectively 4 active servers with players, each having around 3 to 5 players in them. Each server was unique in their own way, so it made sense that those players all spread out to their comfort zone, but each were pretty much unplayably dead because ideally, you need at least 12 players in a server to play a decent match of TF2. If left to their own devices, each server would have died as players got bored. So I took the initiative to server hop each server and invite players to concentrate into a single one. This drastically improved play quality for that one server and even motivated more players who were just looking at the server browser for a game to join. So it went from a state of high entropy to low entropy with the help of an external factor, that being me, which was the only way this would have been possible. We see a similar phenomenon with TF2's casual mode as well. If a lobby fails to fill in empty slots, almost like a reflex, players will re-queue if it takes too long because they'd rather re-roll for a chance to be in a populated server than wait for the current one to fill up. Which is a little telling about the state of the matchmaker, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Now, how does this all converge? What does applying these mathematical, statistical, and logical theorems tell us about matchmaking? A whole lot actually, and it's mostly not good. Starting at heuristics, the problem I alluded to before with the matchmaking is that there is a fatal flaw with the culling of attributes to consider when determining a skill rank. Ideally, the goal with heuristic thinking here is to effectively get a ballpark estimate of a player's skill by giving it a number based on wins and losses. On paper, this makes sense because if two players are trying their best to win, the one that wins more will have a higher skill rating. With a game like Counter-Strike 2, where the main method of play is a competitive queue with a competitive environment, most players are trying their best to win and enter with the mindset of victory. Therefore, keeping track of who wins and who loses as the primary method to change a player's rating is an effective heuristic application, as playing to win is consistent between all games and thus gives a good enough skill rating for the SBMM to work with. There is a strong correlation here with players trying to win and the skill rating derived from win-loss. Obviously, CS2's SBMM isn't purely win-loss, but you get the big idea. TF2's casual mode is not this competitive environment. Most people do not walk into casual mode to win, they play to play the game. Not for glory or competitive drive, but for their own want of playing a great shooter. Unfortunately, this destroys the mindset and skill rating correlation. Remember, in order for heuristics to be effective, the variables you keep and the variables you throw away must be derived from information you know beforehand, and with the goals to do things faster, but good enough to still be effective. Here we know that not everyone is playing TF2 to win, we know that not everyone is playing their very best, and we know that there is no incentive to play competitively. What does this mean? This means that the win-loss method of calculating skill rating is not viable in determining skill rating to get a good enough metric. Someone losing in TF2 does not at all mean that they are worse than the player who won, and vice versa, effectively concluding that the skill rating system is no better than a random number generator, and that's considering that TF2 even has the population big enough to make the system remotely work. Keep this in mind, it will be important later. Let's go back to the CS2 example. Now, there is an interesting concept with Glico and similar rating systems called confidence. This weight or value that influences the change in variables changes how much rating someone gains or loses per match depending on how confident the matchmaker is to its guess on what your skill rating should be based on if that person is playing at a level as expected. Skipping all the hard math, the logic goes that the player that consistently plays at a certain level, the more matches one plays and stays within the rating guess the matchmaker thinks the player should be, the more confident the matchmaker becomes. Ideally, if a player has only played 5 matches, the confidence should be very low, while if the match number is instead 5,000, then the confidence should be very high. This is the law of large numbers at work here, where a true average skill rating is converged through thousands of matches played and ratings changed. That is, if we assume that the player's skill does not change per match and outcomes are as expected. The failure in TF2's SBMM implementation is that the true average skill rating changes dramatically because of the nature of the casual environment. Instead of the mindset of pursuing victory staying consistent, people's attitude towards TF2 matches can change on a whim and vary player to player, meaning that per match, the goal for the accurate skill rating is thrown out completely. On top of that, you have a flawed heuristic application that does not reflect skill accurately. That means that no matter how many matches are played in TF2 casual, the skill rating will never converge to reflect one's skill, even if someone stays at the same skill level, because the matchmaking cannot measure it good enough at all. This ultimately means that the argument that TF2 requires SBMM in its matchmaking in order to achieve balanced matches is completely based on nothing tangible and conclusively wrong, because if anything, it's just making the problem worse. SBMM in TF2 will never converge, even theoretically, to a high probability of balance if given enough time. It's been more than a decade since Meet Your Match launched. I think the real-world empirical evidence speaks for itself. It honestly would be better if the matchmaking did nothing in terms of balance calculations. At least then random chance can at most provide a 50% balance match average over the course of many matches. Speaking of which, this is where I think I can introduce our good old friend Team Scramble. So how does Team Scramble do against heuristics and the law of large numbers? It does pretty damn well. But first, what is it? Team Scramble is the function within the default TF2 server toolset that when it detects a severe balance issue in a game or is called upon by vote, the server randomly redistributes players between two teams. Now, many people say that it's based on score, but I haven't found anything conclusive, and most official sources, like the TF2 wiki, says that it's completely random, so I'm going to just stick with the idea that it is truly random. As far as heuristics is concerned, this is the most naive algorithm one can think of when it comes to game balance. It literally does not take into account anything other than when it is triggered. It's fast, lightweight, and at almost no cost in terms of efficiency. This is as raw of an algorithm as it gets, which makes this itself a good heuristic candidate. And because there is no effect from one scramble to the next, each match is independently balanced from the previous one that is scrambled, and you might now know where I'm going with this. What this means is that since scrambles are entirely random and the true skill of players plays no effect on the scramble, we can confidently say that the law of large numbers is on our side. What this implies is that the more times teams are scrambled within a server, the closer the average of the two teams being in a state of balance will approach 50%. Does this mean that if 5 games are unbalanced, the next one will surely be balanced? No, because then that would be the gambler's fallacy. All this means is that the chance the next match after a scramble is balanced is 50%, a literal coin flip. And personally, I like those odds. And keep in mind, this is with the idea that the game is nominally balanced through some metaphysical measure of skill we cannot measure. In reality, player satisfaction in TF2 is completely arbitrary. That 50% chance could potentially translate to a 55, 65, or even 75% chance that the match will be enjoyable to someone who just wants to play the game, regardless of how balanced or unbalanced it is. To its detriment, however, it could go the other direction with some players, especially those who are insanely picky for what it means for a game to be balanced in their eyes, which is where we have to discuss entropy. While this whole time I've been discussing balanced matches based on skill, there is something that has always been a much more important metric, that is, player satisfaction. Ideally, balanced matches should lead to higher player satisfaction, but that cannot be a guarantee because satisfaction from TF2 is entirely subjective. Many players will enjoy the game when matches are neck and neck, while others will simply be happy if they get to play their favorite class. What I am getting at here is that, at least with TF2, there is no one-size-fits-all circumstance we can reasonably aim for when it comes to the ideal TF2 match. One might think that they know what everyone wants, but that does not cover the wide scope of player expression that TF2 invites. Because TF2 was never meant to fit that specific scope, and that is what truly dooms matchmaking. Matchmaking as it is implemented in TF2 is a system that is meant for a specific kind of play. For everyone who doesn't play that way, TF2 then becomes a worse experience in their eyes. Every massively multiplayer game ever is cursed to deal with this player entropy. As time goes on, if the game is left alone, players will splinter off when the experience of a game becomes unfavorable. For most games, it just means that the player will stop playing and spread themselves out to do other things. That's why live service games push for constant content updates, something that is new and exciting to get the players back, but only temporarily. For a game like TF2, we see it through requeuing for a new match, joining a community server, or just quitting the game. This unfortunately does have the negative impact on the game in its current form, because at least for the main way to play the game, whatever casual is the Valve-endorsed TF2 experience they are selling to players. You match up with other similarly skilled players and play 2 to 3 rounds in order to win or lose. Other ways to play the game, like just hanging out, are disencouraged. This isn't something arbitrary or something I'm pulling out of my ass. It's the system that was implemented, and as we have covered before, it is implemented catastrophically, causing the experience to be non-optimal to anyone who does not want to be a tryhard. It's a systematic failure. So what happens? People leave as there is nothing really to keep them playing and there's plenty of competition for their attention, and thus the great iceberg that TF2 once was, then becomes a puddle. You know, when TF2 had a community server ecosystem, there was a natural failsafe. If the server you were playing on was no longer enjoyable, for any reason including balance, you would just migrate to another one that better fit your unique at the time preference. At the time, there was plenty to choose from, and these unique qualities acted like lures, attracting players with the promise of an experience that they were looking for, be it a trade plaza, a death run server, or Uncletopia. Like, if there was an objective reason to remove the current system, there it is. But lower the music for a moment, because there is something I want to ask. Was this all really necessary? This video, me pulling out all this just to say that things were better before Meet Your Match, that the introduction of matchmaking was a costly, structural, and systemic failure that boils down to the oldest meme in TF2, that Valve does not play their own game. Was that really all truly necessary? You see, there's this GitHub thread where someone had the gall, the cojones, the audacity to request that Valve restore quick play. It lives rent-free in my head when I read this thread because of all the non-arguments made in the comment section, all the thought-terminating cliches. Like, there is having a problem with the rhetorical delivery of the request, right? It's not the best, I'll admit that, right? It's not the most engaging, nor is it the most charitable, or even the most conversation starter kind of thing that you can ask. And then there is just disregarding it completely via personal anecdotes and arguing semantics rather than engaging with the argument on hand. When I read some of the replies and analyze their arguments, I honestly think to myself, do they know? Do they know that human beings play TF2? That more people other than themselves exist when playing TF2? That the other players behind the classes are indeed other human beings with human variables and human wants and unique human needs? You know, they're not robots going through the motions, right? They're people who want to play a game in their own way. But, you know, I guess I'm really just answering my own question here, you know? And maybe I'm just frustrating myself for no reason. So, what is my conclusion here? What is there to do? What can we do in order to push this further, right? To get this idea that matchmaking is just objectively a flawed system that will never, ever, no matter how much you improve it or iterate on it, will never, ever function properly as you want it to on paper. Well, you see, what I want you to take away from this is to hit that subscribe button, comment down below your favorite TF2 weapon, and click my endorsement link to get 10% off your next purchase. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.